This is, in my opinion, this is a direction this work needs to go. We need to focus not on getting animals into the shelter, but keeping animals out of the shelter. And the shelter needs to be, the shelter, or the work needs to go to the people that need it. And it needs to become more human focused rather than saving animal focused. It's saving animals, but it's saving the people who love them too. So
we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force.
You are tuned in to Soul Force Ones, an out-of-the-box podcast that explores the intersection of how careers, activism, spirituality, and hip-hop, or cash, rules everything around us. This week, we speak with Emily James, the Resource Development Director and Interim Director of Heartland Humane Shelter and Care, where John found his family's canine companion and my cat found me. We chat about the challenges facing animal welfare work, where the field is headed looking forward, and ways that we as community members can help. We're joined by 2 rescue interns today as well. Indy, let me hear that tail. Good girl.
We're also creating an experience here. So in the spirit of building and coming together, we're doing the same with People of Color clothing. We just received our first shipment of Soul Force 1, so while supplies last, for a limited time special offer, when you buy a hoodie, a t-shirt, or any of the gear at peopleofcolorclothing.com, MC Stoll and DJ Cole are throwing in 2 free pairs of Soul Force 1s, one for you and one for your friend. So get to peopleofcolorclothing.com, buy your gear, and enter promo code SoulForce1s for 2 free pairs of Soul Force 1s.
Fact be, don't understand, yo, just ask me. Damn, it feel good to have a friend like you. Everyone at the crib really loved you. You love my mom the most, and it be me that you would come to. You were my partner in crime. I met a couple guys, the one that you liked is the love of my life. Shit, you even had a few babies. I got to keep one, but he's the one who really saved me. He follows me round town, my little kick pop slide, always cruising in my ride like how you used to. Windows down, bottleism when we cruise through. My mom would never like you in my car, I'd scoop you. Just me and my favorite, it's not a who's who. And then you started to get sick. I watched you as you started to get weak. My family started to feel need. I know the pain hurt, you started to feel free. I wanted anything for you to come home to. I want to see you in your throne eating homegrown food. Unexpected call, I'm thinking you oh no who. And then they tell me on the line that there's no more you. I'm bugged out. I wasn't ready to lose you, but every dog has his day and yours came too soon. Please don't ever worry about me, you'll never lose me. Rest in peace to my favorite dog, Lucy. Damn, it feel good to have a friend like you. Know how I give it up, defend my view. You understand me, we be family, that's a fact, be. Don't understand, yo, just ask me. Damn, it feel good to have a friend like you.
That was Friends by Vel the Wonder. You can support her at velthewonder.com. And now let's get to our interview with Emily James.
But I know my question, Emily, was I think of the activism piece of this acronym with cash, and I think of it interchangeably with politics. And Colin was telling me just, I think, the approach that you bring, maybe a more progressive mindset to this space. And I'm unfamiliar with the space that you're in, that adoption space, working for animals, having to generally be neutral, because not wanting to isolate any of those clients that you work with that may be neutral in terms of their politics, and in a time like this with Black Lives Matter, but you're working with dogs. How is that related, right? Like, most people think those are separate worlds. And so what does that look like for you in your work in bringing those worlds together, maybe in some degree, in terms of activism and animals?
Sure, that's a huge question. In the entire history of my employment and involvement at this organization, we've really tried to be politically neutral, like you said, because it allows us to be included in more spaces, and to have, access to be able to perform services and to get services to animals and people that need them, without being excluded based on political views or political lobbying. There are a lot of other organizations in this space that do that lobbying work, and so Oregon Humane Society, for instance, is huge, and they do some of that work. It's made sense for our scale to stay out of politics in both the sphere that we work in, so laws regarding animal welfare, and as other political issues, if you want to call them that, as well. But animal rights and animal welfare and pet ownership and the human-animal bond, which is one of the tenets of the organization's mission, is a civil rights issue. It's an inclusion issue. It's an equity issue. People having pets is something that we all value, the relationship that we have with animals, and everyone should have that, and everyone should have access to that. And so we want people to be comfortable here, and we don't want people to have to wonder if they're going to be comfortable here. So it was natural for us, I think, as a group, to say this is something that we want to publicly say, and be seen doing that. So it's not a question. It shouldn't ever be a question that Black Lives Matter, that people of color are welcome here, people of any walk of life, any color of skin can come in here and visit pets, have a pet, ask about pets, and be a part of the community and the values that we cherish. So,
I like how you mentioned that it is a civil rights issue, and that trying to make sure that there's equity and inclusion. Regarding that, I was wondering, what are some changes that you would like to see? And this could be sort of in general, or it could be specific to Heartland, that might help us get there. And is there anything that we can do as members of the community to kind of support that?
The industry as a whole is shifting, and has been shifting for a couple of years, to a position of facilitating and supporting pet ownership, and shifting away from the policing of pet ownership and the sort of savior complex that shelters and rescue has of, we're saving animals from people who are not treating them right, or we're saving animals from not being cared for and finding them new homes. Intake in shelters has been declining over the recent years, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but the issue is not people not having pets, or not, having animal companions in their home or in their family. It's them not having access to services and care that they need. And there's so much overlap with economics, resource deserts in urban areas, with both human access for human services and goods and things that people need to be whole and healthy, along with animal services. So there aren't vet clinics in those economically poor areas, which are generally more ethnically diverse, and it all overlaps. It's just yet another thing. And I think in this sphere, this is something that we can help with, and that we as animal welfare professionals can champion and help with, and work with other agencies to identify people that need help. Because I think when you're going door to door and saying, do you have a pet? Does your pet need vaccinations? You need spay neuter? You can see that maybe these people need help with food as well, or maybe they need access for other services as well. So you can identify that and pass the word along, or maybe refer some of your partner agencies too. So this is, in my opinion, this is a direction this work needs to go. We need to focus not on getting animals into the shelter, but keeping animals out of the shelter. And the shelter needs to be, the shelter, or the work needs to go to the people that need it. And it needs to become more human focused rather than saving animal focused. It's saving animals, but it's saving the people who love them too. So.
That's interesting, that connection between the white savior and the religious connotations.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
The shelter is the savior and saving animals. That's interesting because the idea of pet ownership, right? It assumes ownership as opposed to a relationship. And I think a lot of people would say, well, if you don't have the means to afford an animal, then you don't get an animal. Like it's a luxury. It's almost approached as, if we're talking commodification, as a luxury good. If you don't have the money, well then, if you can't feed yourself and you can't feed your family, you probably shouldn't get a duck.
Which I struggle as a fundraiser. I struggle with that because I don't personally believe that's true. I know how much attention and love and care and support that the companions of people who are live transient lifestyles get over the companions of people who, live in a home but have two working adults. Those animals are not getting that support and attention and exercise and all of the things that animals need. They don't care if they're in a house. They do a lot better, I think, with people who love them, spend more time with them. So, however, a lot of the organization's donors and supporters are still in the mindset that, you need to be able to afford vet care, and you need to be able to afford all of these things immediately. You should be able to afford an emergency surgery for your pet. Meanwhile, the people who work at shelters, including myself, could not afford an emergency surgery for our animals. So, it's a huge struggle working on messaging and communicating with people who really don't feel that way, and trying to sell that and being vulnerable, which is hard for me personally. But I think that's how you relate to people, and you use an example of yourself. Say, well, we're having this conversation. What about me? I work here. You've known me for years. I'm one of those people. I cannot afford this. I would have to choose. I have a child as well. I would have to choose, between vet care and caring for my son. So, how do we make that not the case? And I think that's a little more palatable for people.
I love that you have that approach of relationship versus ownership, because even when Colin introduced the idea of having you on, my initial thought was, what does this have to do with career activism, spirituality, or hip hop? And then Colin, maybe bringing you into this conversation in terms of that spirituality piece, because I didn't see it. That wasn't the first thought. Then when he said it, I was like, oh yeah, of course.
I was just like, it's not offensive, but there is this like immediate pushback of like, this is like everything to me. And I love how, Emily, you brought that up, of it's part of the larger, it's part of everything. We have to see it and how it's connected to everything, right? What is the economic situation like? What opportunities are available to folks in the community? And we were talking last week, I believe it was, about education. And I think it was the same thing, where everything is so separated. And if we talk about education, we often think of the changes that we have to make to improve education as lesson plans or curriculum. And that's part of it. But we also have to look at what opportunities do the families have. Is it dangerous getting to the school? Is it dangerous coming home from, like, it's part of everything, right? Are the students hungry? And I think it's similar with animal welfare, where, you know, I think there's like fences for Fido up in the Portland area, that if you're looking at situations of pets who, or animals who are often getting out, or, right, they're not in the best conditions, a lot of times it's because people can't just afford to put up a fence, right, that's dog proof, which is, as you know, difficult, especially for some of the escape artists that we have. And so trying to understand the needs of the community and ways that we can support them more holistically, I think, is key. So I'm very grateful that you brought that up.
That's a fantastic point. Fences for Fido is an amazing organization, by the way. I mean, it's our role, I think, and it's, you know, we can't, as people who care about these things, we can't do everything. And if you try to do everything, you can't do any one thing well. So personally, I feel like if you focus on one thing and try to do that thing well, and, you know, affect as much change as you can in that sphere, it's gonna branch out and help more people in more ways. You know, us facilitating pet ownership, us keeping pets in homes, pet ownership, I said it again because I've worked in this industry so long. If we facilitate that, we're helping people with stability. We're helping people with, you know, avoid maybe mental health crisis. It's keeping their family together, and it's just one more thing that we can take off their plate so that they can worry about other things, because there's so many things to worry about right now. If we can address that for them, I think we've done our job.
Is there a push or a movement to not call it pet ownership, or to at least approach it from a relationship? You can keep the name. Let's call it pet ownership, but
there definitely is. And like I said, I think for people who are coming into this industry, it's definitely more geared to, especially marketing people. It's definitely there's more mindfulness around syntax and the terminology that we use. And it's funny.
Let's talk about that in terms of health. Like, my initial thought that if you don't have the money, well, then you just don't get a cat or dog. And
Right.
How that is so prohibitive and restrictive and limiting, and the value of having a relationship with an animal, what that can teach young children, what that can mean for a family. I think of this pandemic as not being just an economic and health crisis, but a spiritual crisis. And that idea of oneness, of coming together, and how animals are a part of that.
Mm-hmm. There's barriers built in everywhere, I think, for procuring a companion, for providing care for them, for maintaining them in a way that's satisfactory, not only for yourself and for your peers, but for the law. And so I think it's our job as, you know, industry professionals and people who, you know, just work in this organization locally for our own community, to do what we can to advocate for, you know, low cost services and access to those services, and just changing people's minds. I mean, everything just costs so much. And unfortunately, I think emergency services around here for pets are more than anyone can afford, unless you're very wealthy. You know,
Is that something like the industry, like thinking of our healthcare industry, universal healthcare? I mean, are people talking about universal healthcare for animals to make it more affordable? Or what do you say to the people who do believe that it's a luxury, and so that family of four who's struggling to make ends meet, and dad just lost his job, and now they can't take care of Fido, that, you know, just get Fido to another family? Like, what do you say to those people in terms of the value of that dog to that family, or someone who may not even have an animal, and may be struggling, but suffers from mental health. And this might be actually a great thing to be in spiritual connection with a living being that happens to be a dog or a cat.
It's so important, and it's a connection that so many people have that don't have family and that don't have, you know, parents or children. You know, that's their family member. So, you know, when I'm trying to sell this concept to donors, to supporters who are generally not, you know, in that bracket, in that situation, I ask them to evaluate their own life and to, you know, basically explain empathy to them, because some people struggle. Some people struggle with the concept of empathy, and you really have to spell it out. And it's like you would talk to a child, and not to be condescending to them, but just to say, look, you know, say you were not to have all the resources you have. You love your pet, you love your companion. If you couldn't afford to keep them, what would you do? What would you hope there was in the world to help you? You know, I would hope that there was somebody who had more resources that would say, look, this is important to me. I can relate to this. Here are some funds or some resources to be able to support other people in this situation. And that's a goal I have for myself. When I'm financially solvent enough to do lots of philanthropy, that's what I will do with, you know, part of the funds that I have, because it's so important. And that's the missing piece, is that people have to support this. People who have resources need to support the people who don't. And isn't that the missing piece everywhere? It's the missing piece in all of these scenarios, is that people who have the ability to support it should. And if I could radical philosophy, I know, but
no, if I could just jump in too, it's right. Like, people who have those resources have them, from my perspective, because of the work of others, right? Sure. In the system that we're in. And I just was thinking of, right, you mentioned these barriers to pet companionship and all of these things. And I think of, like, Duerksen, who owns the apartment that I'm in, or, you know, who I pay every month for 4 years, started charging pet rent as soon as I got a cat, right? And I had discussions with them of, right, you don't charge child rent, right? If you have children in the home, if you have 2 or 3 kids in the home who can, you know, play and get rough and break things and ride on the walls.
And I can attest to it. My 2 children do much more damage than my dog.
Agree. They're far more destructive.
So there are those types of barriers. And then, you know, is Duerksen, that I know of, Duerksen doesn't give any funds to Heartland, right? So it's $30 per pet plus a non-refundable $250 down that you put down on every pet in this town. And they justify by saying it's quite common.
Yeah, it is common.
And that to me means nothing, because if something is common, it doesn't make it just or right. I honestly don't know how that's legal, but we have things like that. There's breed-specific legislation that, right, makes it illegal to own certain breeds, sometimes in cities, right? And, right, it could be pit bulls, it could be Rottweilers. And just thinking of how, earlier I think we mentioned how it's all connected. Pit bulls used to be like the American family dog, but over time it's become something that's super racialized and classed, and who tends to own pit bulls, right? And they have this vicious imagery along with Black folks in this country. And so if you say pit bulls aren't allowed in this building, a lot of the time you're excluding Black and brown folks who might want to live in that building. So you can't discriminate that way against people in such an overt way, but against animals, right, you can. And that also has similar results that folks in power might want. So I like how you mentioned that, right? We have to educate, we have to sometimes try and explain empathy to folks. And it can kind of be a downer to do that, I would say. And you who have been in this field for 10 plus years in a variety of roles with Heartland, what has that journey been like for you? And how do you find, I'm in education, I know that we're underpaid, we're undervalued, we're underappreciated. I feel like my other love in animal welfare, it's very similar, and it's also often women. I don't think those things are just out of the blue, right? What has your journey been like?
It's been exhausting, to put a word to it. I mean, people who work in this industry certainly don't do it for the fabulous pay. Much like education, it's mission and values driven work. And sorry, I'm getting emotional about it. It's hard to advocate for yourself to be treated better or valued more, because the funds that you're fighting for should be going to your work, right? And it's taken a long time, and it's been really interesting to see the industry grow as I've been a part of it. And you're absolutely right. It's the vast majority is women. The vast majority, at least in this area, is white women. And so there's definitely, I think that's where a lot of that savior complex comes from. We're guilty. We're so guilty of that. And it's changed even just since I've been a part of this organization and this industry. It's changed in a decade. There's finite resources. There's finite, there's a lot of people doing this work. And, I think we've all just come to a place where we, especially the employees here, everyone has a side hustle. Everyone's got a second job. Everyone has at least one other thing to support them so that they can keep doing this. And while it's made it be able to exist the way that it does today, I don't think that's equitable personally. It's taking advantage of people, I think, in a way. And, are we allowing ourselves to be taken advantage of? I think a little bit we are. So, but we continue to do it. We continue to be here. We continue to show up because what we do is important and we care about it personally.
People would say that that's supply and demand. You're willing to, or people who take on a job are willing to do it. But I think you bring up a really good, interesting point in terms of, is work that is valued. Our teachers, folks who are doing work, that because there's value in it, it's exploited. So I know that I can get away paying you less because your heart is connected to this. Is that how it works? Or is it more the supply and demand? And so, because the perception would be that anyone that it's less skilled, that someone else can come in here and they're willing to do it. So if you're not willing to do it for this rate, well then by means, there's the door. We'll get somebody else who's willing to do it, right? And so at what point does it become kind of exploitive of that labor?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's the perception that anyone can do it, that it's easy, that it's, I think especially here, that it's women's work. There's still that undervalued work that women do is easy and simple and not physically or mentally taxing at all. But
like even empathy, that's easy, right?
Yeah,
a lot of people don't have it.
We're not monetizing emotional labor, so
in physical labor, like there's nothing easy. There's nothing easy about animal care at all. Yeah, why that is, I don't know that it's supply and demand. I feel like part of it is it's exploiting the empathy and the care and the love that people have. Similar to education where, well, it's a labor of love and you love the kids. So, right, teachers who strike, oftentimes not for better wages, but for smaller classes, to have a nurse or a counselor at the school rather than just cops. They're demonized and they're seen as being, well, they're not thinking of the kids. The kids are missing out on classes because you're striking. And I know in Chile and in a lot of Latin America, teachers who organize and strike, they have signs that say like, teachers who are striking are teaching the youth through that strike. It's similar in animal welfare where everyone I know that works there should be getting paid more, should have healthcare, should have access to mental health as well, because it's such a taxing, difficult job, just as a volunteer. And I'm super, you keep the distance there to protect us and to protect the staff as well, but it's super difficult. And I think it's just exploiting that knowledge that these people who work in this very difficult field care so much for the animals that you're putting them in a difficult place, almost daring them like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to, these dogs won't get the care if you're not here. Are you going to leave? Which is super troubling.
It's taxing on already taxed mental health and emotional health and physical health. I mean, people are coming in when they've, worked so many shifts in a row, and it's, putting their bodies to the test. And we do, it's hard to find people who last in this industry as well as other similar industries, because people can't, you have to constantly adapt, and you have to constantly compartmentalize, and you have to be okay with a certain amount of compromise for your own, mental, emotional, and physical health, I think. And it's just, it's very difficult, I think, to find people that last. And so the perception that people are disposable, and that the supply and demand, the turnover is acceptable, sure, you can put another body in that position, but you're going to lose, you lose experience, and you lose knowledge, and, you lose the ability to cope that people have built over, the resilience that people have built. So, it's true that people can be replaced, but I mean, purely from a financial standpoint, isn't it cheaper to retain employees than it is to rehire? But there's a lot of resources required, I think. And like teachers striking, we're never going to be, we're not going to be, we don't even know what we're worth, right? So it's really more about, give us those resources. We need, maybe more staff, so that we're not working too much. And we need appropriate staff, so we're not doing 3 roles. That's just the amount of stress that creates is not sustainable for people. So.
Are most animal shelters nonprofits? Because I'm thinking of a teacher strikes, it's
Sure.
targeted at the school district for more funding. If animal workers were to strike, who would be the target? Because is it more so that we, as in citizens and residents of this world, don't value this work because we're not donating money so that you can then get paid, and others who are doing this type of work? Is that where the issue is? Is that we as a society don't value it?
I think it's a combination. Most shelters are nonprofits. Some of them are affiliated with law enforcement, which is its own beast to deal with. So there's values and a disconnect of values that's occurring, and is it with supporters? I don't know that it's with supporters necessarily, because you could be in an organization that's receiving a ton of funds in donations, but it's the allocation of those funds and the choices that are being made about how that money is being spent that dictates the health and safety and sustainability and holistic the health, really, just in general, of the workplace. So whether it's a board of directors, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's government run, or whether it's part of an umbrella organization like an ASPCA run shelter, I think there's different values at stake at each of those places, and people making decisions that maybe aren't the ones that are being affected by the decisions. Again, the problem everywhere. So
So I'm all on board with companionship and relationship as opposed to ownership. And my mind went to India and animals, dogs on the road. They're free in a sense. And I love what you said, because I hadn't considered, and I was thinking about Peter Ewald and the canine caravan and making it accessible and serving those who don't have the means but have this very beautiful relationship with their animal, and it's very fulfilling. And so trying to reconcile this idea of savior, like, should we be trying to save the animals? On some level, I agree, yes, we should, that's our responsibility. But then there's this other part of me that feels like we're putting ourselves as human beings on this pedestal, so to speak, and it's the same white savior complex, that maybe there isn't anything that needs to be saved. I don't know.
It's food for thought, for sure.
Well, what's your thoughts?
I mean, I don't know, honestly. I mean, I think if there's a need, there's going to be people trying to serve and fill that need. And if people are stating a need, you should believe them. You know, a at-risk person or an at-risk family or a client, depending on what situation you're in. But yeah, I mean, you know, there are animals loose in you know, living in colonies. Around here, it's feral cats, and there are people who trap feral cats, and we do spay and neuter for them. And you know, I think there's definitely a savior complex, savior thoughts going on for the folks who are doing the trapping for those cats, because those cats would live their natural lifespans as part of a food chain. Were it not for them being spayed and neutered, I mean, it kind of alters their behavior, so it's going to alter, you know, what they're doing and their chances at survival. But
right, is there a reason that we don't need feral cats? I mean, are they doing any harm to the planet? Like, why is there this desire to control the cat population? I mean, because I also think of all of the destruction, because to answer my previous question, I think there is some responsibility that we have, considering all of the destruction we've done to this planet and that we've done to species, to provide some level of saving, because we've done so much damage. And then on the other level, I'm like, let the cats be, free the cats.
Free the cats. That sounds like a cat talking.
Yo, homie don't fetch, only woke to stretch under a thought bubble rich with bowls of goldfish. Skittish in a company of stranger danger, otherwise chase drawstrings, tails and lasers in a steel cage match with a maze of cables. Brazen, game face based on a zazel, oversized ears up, puke in the meow mix, shred a pair of earbuds, remedy is cowlick. Thanks, Curbs, looking like a millie. Keep an old man sharp, keep a cold chantilly. Spun plum dizzy in a frisky moment. Never lands on her feet, though I think she's broken. Mouse are in training, nap on the toaster. Decorator cubicle with dogs playing poker. 15 years taking prescriptions, now it shrink like, I don't know, maybe get a kitten.
You know, cats, feral cats and outdoor cats is a hugely contentious issue in our industry. Cats cause a ton of destruction to bird and wildlife populations, and even just to people's landscaping and things like that. I mean, to me, it's more important about the bird and wildlife populations, but.
So it's kind of the bird right activist versus the cat right activist?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, snap.
Yeah.
I didn't know about the beef.
Oh yeah, there's huge major beef. So us doing TNR, which is trap, neuter, release, is pretty contentious as far as a stance for a shelter to take as well. A lot of shelters do perform TNR. Some of them just perform euthanasia. So if someone were to trap cats, they would just euthanize the cats, because the rationalization there is that immediate death is better than long-term suffering. That was an industry standard for a long time. That's a stance that Heartland as an organization used to take. And we shifted to performing TNR as, in a way, as a harm reduction, because it is stopping the cycle of breeding and, the cycle of reproduction, and sort of lessening the impact on the environment, but it's still an issue. And those cats are still out there, even when they're spayed neutered, they're still out there catching birds and mice and all sorts of wildlife. So it's hard to know the right answer. I mean,
is that the only destruction? Is it really, it's save the birds?
I mean, they dig, they make homes and things. It's considered a nuisance, like a pest animal for some people. In some parts of the country and some parts of the world, they're exterminated, like you would do rodents. Some people do for rodents. So it's just a philosophy that we have here, I think, at least in this part of the United States. So
human beings are so interesting. I mean, we help create these species in terms of domestication, right? And then we want to kill them off.
Mm-hmm. Too many of them, right? When you have a rat problem, you release cats. Then you have a cat problem, and then what do you do? So,
yeah, I know. It's my understanding too that I'm not sure how it is with cats, but with dogs, if you neuter or spay and then release back into that area, that animal then still occupies that region. And so if you just euthanized, I'm not sure if it's this way with cats, other cats would just sort of fill that void right away. Whereas if you trap, neuter, and release, right, that animal that can't reproduce is then still back in that spot, keeping other cats away and so maybe long term, that's a better goal as well.
It's been studied in both cats and dogs, and that was an issue with the eradication of dogs in some Asian countries, where dogs were rounded up and exterminated because of the perceived public health risk of rabies. But it was then found that more dogs just came and took their place, and they definitely had rabies. So you have to manage those populations. It's absolutely true. They all have, they act just like large wild cats in that respect, that they have sort of a range that they establish, and they guard the range that they patrol. And there's a sort of a fixed population, and for managed populations, some come in, some leave, but for the most part, it remains the same members. So when you take them out, more just come in. It creates a vacuum. So, in the short term anyway, I guess that's rationale for TNR. Also, they're vaccinated, so they're not going to be giving people diseases. So if we want to be human-centric about it, that's the way to go, I guess.
I was going to say that's something I found too in work that I've done in Ecuador especially as well, where there's a large street dog population, like in the capital Quito, and you have to find out how do you appeal to folks when you're making that argument. And unfortunately, a lot of the times you have to center people. And so it becomes a public health issue for people, right? Yeah. If you want to make any argument, it's always, I guess, maybe centering the most dominant voices and trying to appeal to them. And I don't know, I go back and forth between trying to make the argument based on ethics, right? Or trying to be the most strategic about those things. Have you found that that's been your experience quite a bit?
Absolutely.
You have to feel
people out. It does suck, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting being a person who, who feels this way and who feels very passionately this way to have to dial yourself back, and you have to read a room, and you have to sort of guess at someone's motivations, which most of the time is effective but can backfire. So if you go straight for, well, it's a public health, that's happened to me in giving a presentation to I think it was a Rotary Club, giving a presentation to a Rotary Club about animal welfare, and then you're saying, well, it's a public, it's a public health issue. And like, well, how can you say that? It's, it's about the animals. I'm like, yes, it is. Thank you. No, I look like a jerk. I wish I just said that first, but you never know. You don't know. And usually you just expect the worst from people, frankly. And maybe that's just me being jaded after so many years. But you just expect people to be, what about me? So.
John, do you have any other questions?
I was going to ask who joined us on this interview, because we've heard your dog's voice, I believe.
Yes, you heard my dog's voice, yeah.
And their name?
That's Otto. He's a Double Dapple Dachshund, and he's 10 years old.
Nice.
He's my guardian and protector.
That's the hip-hop connection right there, like Double Dapple Dachshund.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
That's perfect.
And I do want to thank you too. Like, I, in January, adopted Sombrieta, who was Mamba.
Yes.
A cat at the shelter who totally adopted me. Like, I would go in after working with the dogs for some hours and go see the cats, and this one, just the way she looked at me, and wasn't particularly friendly at all, but just whatever it was, her feline telepathy or whatever was just like, you're going to take me. And so it was, in January, just before the pandemic hit, and I know that she has made my life and the life of my two roommates a million times better. And yesterday we went out to Detroit Lake, and we were out loving it, beautiful place, and all of us are just like, I wonder how Sombrita's doing, She's always there with
a camera. Get a camera and creep on your pets at home.
You should not have said that. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go on and order one online right now.
Emily's endorsing the surveillance state.
Yeah, no, I know. Normally I'm like, hell no. But if you can creep on your pets, I'm all about it.
Oh, that is funny.
What are they doing? Why are they doing that?
You got Uno as well, and she's been a joy for your family.
Oh, she's been fantastic. We're trying to get our children to be as well behaved as Uno is. Our children love playing Uno. And so It's funny then when it's a matter of, does Uno want to play Uno? And, it's fun. Yeah, she's such a sweet dog. Very patient, very sweet.
And Emily, is there anything that we should, tell folks, we can tell the listeners about ways to support? What do you recommend for people who want to help?
For people who want to help, that's a great question. I mean, and financial support is always needed for any nonprofit, especially right now. Anything that you care about, support financially as much as you can, and advocate for people that have animal companions that need help. Help them find services if you're able to do that, especially your maybe older neighbors or friends that aren't as savvy with the technology as those of us who are a little bit younger are. They may, as things shift online, especially right now, it's harder to locate services and to get help. So reach out to people just in general, say hello, tell people you love them, tell your pets you love them, and support your shelter.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, this has been great. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks, Emily. It was really nice to meet you. Well, thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
This is great. I'm glad to know people that are podcasting, because podcasts are cool. And I like listening to them.
We really enjoyed it. And I think what's cool is that, and we've talked about this before, is it's the interconnections for us. And so it's the fact that we can have this conversation about animals, and it's a different conversation than what we had last week, but in many ways it's the same conversation. Like, I love how, because again, like the activism piece, the spirituality piece, this is your career. And I think the hip hop we'll weave in. We got the Dipple Dapple. I didn't say it right.
Doppelganger. Double Dapple Dachshund doppelganger. That's what I want.
Triple D?
Yeah.
Triple D, yeah.
So good.
Totally.
Yes. Well, thank you, Emily. I will let you go.
Thanks, you guys.
Always regarded as man's best friend, to keep your company and guard your property. When on the loose, they run in packs and chase the cats. You know them as
all my DOGs and GBs and GODs. Ain't nothing truer than these.
a four-legger looking for a reservoir. Dog days, dogging them out in a dead-end job. It's a dog life, dog-eat-dog world. But I'ma go out with my
That was fun.
Yeah, that was good, right?
I thought so.
But for this week's remix, I know you had in mind a couple things that you wanted to sort of dive into, and one of those was Ishmael, which was it Daniel Quinn, right, as the author.
Right.
And I remember reading that book. The first time that I read it was, I was in Ecuador during my undergrad and didn't really know what to expect. I'd heard good things and I opened it up. And from the start, when you find out the whole premise of the book, sort of the conversation and how you as a reader are put into kind of the student role where you don't really know where it's going. And they're asking these questions right throughout the book. You're asking the questions as well. And then getting those answers throughout as you read. But I do love that one section where they talk about, because it's about humanity, right? And the role that we have on the planet and givers and the takers and sort of that shift with agriculture, I think, and settlement, if I remember correctly. And anthropocentrism, right? With people at the center of the universe, right? You could say with spirituality that we're the center and everything is for us and our consumption. And there's that moment in the book with like the anthropologist, I believe, who goes and interviews all of the different species. And there's the one, I think they're in the ocean interviewing the jellyfish and about their origin story, right? And the jellyfish, you know, tells them from the beginning of single-celled organisms all the way up to these tiny different forms of life that led up to the current moment with us, right? The jellyfish, and now we're here. So it's sort of the way that we see things as people is everything leading up to this moment where we are the center of everything, and everything has occurred because of, to get us to where we are with us at the center. And yeah, that just, you know, it makes you think, because it takes you out of people's perspective and says, well, what would that be like if each species, each animal out there saw it this way? Kind of flips it on us.
So that origin, that creation story, what Ishmael and Daniel Quinn refer to as the creation myth, and it being, as you alluded to, the levers and the takers, this idea that God created the world for us, that all of the animals, all of the trees, all of the natural resources were created, that at the end of the day, the last thing that God did was created the human being. We're the pinnacle of creation, as opposed to this idea that we are creation. We are a part of creation. As George Carlin said, it's not the planet that's effed, it's us, right? The planet, the Earth, has been here before us. It will be here after us. How conceited of us to think that we are saving the rainforest, that we are saving the whales. If anything, we are the ones causing the extinction of some of these species, and we're just trying to interrupt the impact to the biodiversity of this planet.
Carlin also said, a person is smart, people are stupid, which I thought was brilliant.
You were probably out walking your dog, which is what I'm usually doing. Walking my dog. Because I love my dog. I love all my dogs. I love every dog I ever had. I remember them all, and I love every one of them. Still love all my dogs, and I've had me a lot of goddamn dogs. In my lifetime, I have had me a bunch of different dogs. Because you do keep getting a new dog, don't you? You just keep getting one dog right after another. That's the whole secret of life. Life is a series of dogs. It's true.
I think it is unique for animals who have that historical dependence, or interdependence rather, with people, right? So dogs, cats, I think of domesticated animals that we have bred over thousands of years. I think it's different than maybe the way that we approach our work or saving the whales, right? I think there is so much that we can do, but as you say, it's protecting animals from ourselves so often, right? From the damage that we're causing, unfortunately. And I think it's interesting as well, as you mentioned in the interview, about different cultures, because different cultures do have different relationships with animals. And I can't jump in and say, well, this is right or this is wrong. But I think it's important for us to reflect on our own values and maybe some of the contradictions there, right? So we could say, like, a big thing that a lot of vegans say is like, well, why do you love your dog and eat pigs? And it's pretty arbitrary if you think of the intelligence, the ability to feel and to suffer of sentient beings of a pig versus a dog. Pigs are very intelligent beings, but it's just culturally, we view one much differently.
Yeah, I was starting to think how I took a break and went up and had a chicken burrito.
Well, it's
so maybe that's the beef of this episode is MC Stoll and DJ Cole, the carnivore and the vegan. See, I don't have that resonates with me. I think the biggest issue, I don't know that I have an issue necessarily with people eating meat as much as I have a problem with how we care for or lack thereof of our animals. So I'm thinking of the factory farms and the production, the animal production, right? I feel like I'm for those people who hunt, and there's almost a certain level of respect, relationship, even with that animal, even if it's just a simple level of respect that this was an animal, that I took life.
The lives of these animals within this whole chain that we've created are also, right, dependent on gender and what they give to us. So a lot of times male chicks are just thrown into grinders right away when they're seen to be male, right?
Right, they have no use to us.
Exactly. They're not going to lay an egg every day on top of another battery cage on top of another battery cage. And it's just, it makes me think of.
And that's the problem, is those decisions are made because we have commodified them. Like, your existence as a being is only for my consumption and my well-being.
And how is that tied to capitalism, right? I think it's the same way, where we don't have to have meat with every single meal, right? It's not healthy to have meat with every single meal, from what I've read and understand. I don't think as a vegan that everyone needs to be vegan. That might be ideal in some world where there's no suffering whatsoever. That's not the case. But I saw a post this morning that was like, vegans need to start thinking about, or we need to start working on, not this idea of like perfectionism and that no one should have any type of animal product ever, but right, there's supply and demand, reducing that demand. And when you have chicken nuggets or a hamburger for 99 cents, I don't know how that's possible to create a being, feed that animal, inject it with hormones, antibiotics, slaughter it, right? There's abuse throughout the chain. And we saw that as well with COVID-19 in meatpacking plants, right? The danger of that work before COVID, of doing that type of work, the mental toll that it takes. And then also, right, folks being in such a small place, it often falls on immigrant labor. I mean, there's suffering throughout that chain. And I think it is tied to capitalism, the way that how we view others. It can be other people and exploitation, and it also translates into how we view other species, I feel. Right? They're for me, to bring it back to the book, right?
Right, yeah, and you only have that 99-cent burger if there is that mass production, which requires some level of exploitation. And in this case, you're talking about the exploitation of those animals. What really resonated in that conversation was the companionship, the relationship, the spiritual being of an animal, of species. And then that reminded me, because we had you over for dinner the other day, and we had a socially distant dinner and funeral. We found out that our goldfish had died. And this was a goldfish that we purchased 3-4 years ago. We use this filter that we have that, you know, filters out all the chlorine and everything. The fish lived really long. We had actually bought it because our dear friend Bridget had been diagnosed with cancer. And so she had been given a year to live. And we figured, it was during Nowruz, which is the celebration of spring. And so we had this celebration, and that's why I remember, because the fish was part of the decor. So it went from being a part of the decor to a part of our family. And it's interesting because it's a goldfish, right? It's a feeder fish when you get from the store. And to be honest, I wouldn't say that I had a spiritual relationship or any like deep, profound relationship with this fish. But it was fascinating how it was in the middle of our kitchen on the island, and the fish saw us. There was no doubt that when you moved, the fish saw you. So this goldfish, that's a feeder fish, its existence is to feed other fish. And here it is, sees us, comes up, and motions as if it wants food. And when you put your fingers, even if you don't have food, over the bowl, it'll come up to it and it'll move, right? So there's this interaction that you're having with this fish. So the fish dies, and so we had a little funeral. I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, and the 5-year-old was overwhelmed with grief. Put a little, set up like a small little box, put the box, and the goldfish inside, and we just had a moment of silence for the fish. I don't know. It was just kind of interesting that fish was a part of our family in some way. And it certainly meant something to our daughter.
You know, I heard you also sort of explaining to your daughters about, you know, this is what we all return to, right? Like to the earth. I thought that was very beautiful. And, right, your younger daughter can obviously feels it, right? And it's a sad moment for her. And with fish, it's interesting because they're not furry. It's so easy to assume that what we see in a dog, right, is guilt. There have been studies done on that and how we read animal emotion. But dogs and cats are much more alike, right, with humans than fish, for example. Snakes, reptiles. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there. You know, so even though we don't read it a certain way, I think a lot of the assumptions that we make, it just helps me see that, like, so much of how we see the world, how we interact with the world, what we expect from the world is just focused on us. Even if it's whether or not we're going to respect another being, it's like, well, does it remind me of myself? Is it experiencing what I'm experiencing?
And I know you haven't watched the documentary Blackfish, but thinking of dolphins in particular in terms of intelligence, and it's awful just knowing, I mean, the trauma, the experience of dolphins that you see in that film, all for our entertainment, right? So that SeaWorld, so I can go watch a show and see some dolphins do some tricks. The suffering, the lengths that we will go to create suffering for another person or another animal, a species, creation, right? I think of the environment. The level of suffering that we are willing to inflict for our own gratification and fulfillment on a very material level. Oh man, did you ever watch Tiger King?
Hell no. Did you watch Tiger King?
I did. I watched it. So maybe I'm a part of the problem. I don't know. Is it a problem? Because it is entertaining, because in the sense that you have these crazy ass characters.
I mean, really, we're all part of the problem. It's not like me not watching that has any effect on Netflix and what they're doing. But it's just fascinating to think about. And one hot take that I have that I know a lot of folks don't agree with, it's always interesting to me to see social justice movements, organizations, and then the speciesism within that, right? If it is really, right, none of us are free until we're all free, is that just people? And in my mind, I go, I would think if we had a better relationship with other beings and our environment, and we saw ourselves as part of this whole, right? If it is this soul force one, then the way that we treat animals as well, I think, is a huge part of that. And so, you know, if we're down to have a meeting and talk about liberation, and we're running through and getting some Chick-fil-A, to me, that is contradictory. I probably won't mention that in most settings. I think, right, we have a lot of work to do in every way, and we're all complicit in different ways. It has nothing to do with like superiority, but it's always this thing that's kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Is that something that we should be concerned with as well? Or is it something to just completely, is that too far?
I like how you phrase that though, in terms of the soul force ones, that connections. Because I do, and I'm saying this as someone who just ate a chicken burrito. To me, it's the animism. It's recognizing that we're a part of creation. It's recognizing the interconnections, the interdependence, the significance of the honeybee for our vegetables, our fruits, for our livelihood. But how on a daily basis, let alone in our lifetime, how few of us are going to appreciate the honeybee for our survival as a species. Because there's this idea that I'm strong, that I'm going to survive, pull myself up by my bootstraps, that it's about the human race and to hell with everything else because I'm going to get mine. And this disrespect and lack of acknowledgement for that interconnection, which makes us spiritual beings, right? To be a spiritual being, I think, is to recognize that of spirit within all of creation. And so I think there's some significance of that gets to a larger ideology that you're speaking of. So it's the same thing when we talk to Sandra and we're talking about intersectionality between these movements and how it's all connected. Like there's value in seeing those connections, to feeling those connections, that all of this is very much a relationship between each other and Earth and creation.
And like you mentioned, the honeybees, right? It's not that pollination only benefits us as humans. It benefits the entire food chain. Everything that exists within that environment. Birds eat fruit, right? Lots of animals eat fruit. They depend on that, the production of that fruit for survival. And yeah, I think a lot of times even, right, intention versus impact. We as people can have good intentions, but then we find out after the fact, like, oops, this is an invasive species. Oops, this has done a lot more harm than good, right? We were intending to do good, but the results are otherwise. And we have our hands so much, right? Spraying for weeds and the damage that causes that we didn't understand. I don't think we understood it first. It could be that the corporations just said, mum's the word. Let's keep selling this. Let's rename it. Let's rebrand it.
And that's what it is. It's control. So in that landscaping, I want to control this environment. And that's what, you know, going back to Ishmael, that's what a large part of this is about, is imposing our domination and control of what we consider our environment, our world. It's rooted in our language, right? Our language sets the stage for how we experience each other in Earth and creation, because we have separated ourselves from it. And that's the leavers and the takers, right? That's what Ishmael's talking about, is this, our indigenous brothers and sisters, and there is indigenous people throughout the world, and recognizing that we, whether we're in America, India, Cambodia, by and large, we are the takers. We have subscribed to this lifestyle in which we consume the world because it's here for our benefit.
I love that. If we look at the food chain, if we look at feeder fish, we as people have taken ourselves out of that, right? As humans, we think. But what happens if me as a land creature go out for a surf and I get bitten by a shark? In Australia, that's happened quite a bit. And then what they do is they set up buoys and hook sharks and slaughter sharks off the coast because it's a danger to people. They run the ocean.
No, we run the ocean.
Exactly. We run this shit. Again, right? We do these things. I've told my parents, like, if I'm out on a run and a mountain lion gets me, do not go after the mountain lion. protect that mountain lion. In one way, it's the most natural way I could go. I'm out running, I see it, maybe I try and get like a little quick hug in before it rips my head off. But then the only way I can continue as a being is being eaten by that animal and then living through its offspring. So you kill that animal before it can reproduce, and then that's where I end as a species with maybe I turn into plants or whatever afterwards. But I've always thought too, like if you get eaten by an animal, then you continue through the food chain and you can continue to exist in some way or another. Don't go after the animal, right? It got me, it won. I can't outrun that. If a bear gets me, I'm gonna try and get in one bear hug before I'm done, you know? Be the most exciting moment, split second. I don't know why, but I've thought about these things, John.
It's a dog eat dog competition. No doubt. I'll be going like you wish, and I'm out.
And that does it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Emily James for joining us. Please make sure to support Heartland Humane at heartlandhumane.org, and you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram. There are many ways to support, not just via donations, though that does help. You can volunteer, foster, adopt, sponsor an animal, among many other options. We strongly encourage you to check out Heartland and/or your local shelter. Give them a call and see how you can best help today. This week's podcast featured quite a few tracks. We opened with our theme song by OJ the Producer. Make sure to support him at ojtheproducer.com. He has incredible beats up for sale, so you better hurry. We then heard Friends by Vel the Wonder. Find her music and gear at velthewonder.com. That was followed up by Aesop Rock's Kirby, one of my favorite tracks and videos. If you haven't seen it, make sure to check that out, aesoprock.com. We had a snippet of Dogs by Haiku d'Etat, the hip-hop supergroup of AC Alone, Micah 9, and Abstract Rude. We had a bit of the late, great George Carlin, and lastly, a taste of Dog Eat Dog off of De La Soul's great Stakes is High album. Make sure to log in to soulforceones.com, where you can find us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you can find the links to all of our socials. Soul Force Ones, baby. Shout out to this week's interns, Beans and Indy, two rescues who certainly put their paws into this week's project. And last but not least, for your own pair of Soul Force Ones and 10% off your order of gear at People of Color Clothing, use promo code SoulForce1s at checkout at peopleofcolorclothing.com. That's People of Color with a U, clothing.com. Until next time, y'all. Peace.
This is great. I'm glad to know people that are podcasting because podcasts are cool.